I'm Joe Levy, and welcome to Auriculum, which is an occasional podcast that accompanies Robert Xgau's And It Don't Stop, which is his newsletter on Substack. And when I say an occasional podcast, it's very much occasional, as this is the first episode since last April, although we're hoping to do more this year. I'm kind of the chief cook and bottle washer on And It Don't Stop. And this episode is my idea, so I am hosting it. Bob is here. Bob, would you say hello to everybody?
Hello, fans. Nice to talk to you.
And Bob and the Auriculum team are joined by Rob Sheffield, who was the guest on the very first episodes of Auriculum. And we'll be discussing both Rob's top albums of 2020. The And It Don't Stop Dean's List was published not too long ago, 71 albums deep, and Rob published his top 20 in Rolling Stone in December. If you haven't read it, there'll be a link to that accompanying this episode. So let's get right into it. Bob, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to start with two albums, two guitar records on the Dean's List, number 1 and number 3. Both of these records are somewhat obscure. I think in conversation, Rob has told us he hadn't heard these or heard of either of them before the Dean's List. So at number 1 is Hanging Tree Guitars, and at number 3 is the group Dua and Chauveau record. Tell us about both those records and how you came to hear them.
Well, first of all, it ought to be said that the group Dua record is from 2017, but since it had exactly one review in the United States, I thought it was a new record here. So I didn't feel too bad about sticking it into a 2020 list. Hanging Tree Guitars is a collection put out by the Music Maker Relief Foundation, which I don't know how much else it does, but put out this record. It put out a book too. It's various blues artists, most of them from Eastern North Carolina, now living, all black, playing guitars made by Freeman Vines is the name of the luthier, who apparently cut down a black walnut tree, which had been used to lynch people, and made several guitars from it. Now, it's not really true that all of the music on this album, it is made from one of those guitars, but it's a hell of a good title, and I don't have the slightest regret that they did it. And the other thing that happens is I've been listening to a lot of country blues records in recent years, partly because my wife, Carola, really loves them. And so we listen to early Skip James a lot. I still haven't gotten into Charlie Patton. I've never written about Robert Johnson, but I've been playing him. But they're all from the 30s, basically, 20s and 30s. It's all people who are now dead. The sound quality is not terribly good, although you certainly can hear how different and extraordinary these artists were. But this is a bunch of mostly men. I think there's only one woman on the record, who's Freeman Vines' sisters, doing a gospel thing that they actually cut in 75. All the others have been cut in recent, I think it's 75 years. And what's amazing about them is that you think of this as being a curated music by dead black people that is mostly prized by white collectors.
You're talking about country blues in general.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I can making a lot of exceptions. Please don't get mad at me and start talking about Corey Harris.
Right. You're talking about music that is generally for a specialized audience.
Right. These people, they're all alive. Most of them. I think maybe one or two of them has passed. Not that I'm actually aware of. Some of them are singing what are essentially protest songs. They're singing about how bad it is to be a black person in the South, which you don't actually get from those. And the country blues guys, in most of them, all of that content is kind of muted or translated into metaphor. Not here. And not always either. That's not the only thing they do. There's a wonderful love song on that record called Clock on the Wall, and a bunch of gospel songs. It begins with blues songs and then it kind of mutates into gospel midway through the record. But these are all really compelling voices singing interesting things and playing guitar in a good way. And this music that you think of as being a matter of, for the archives, now a century old almost, it's not. They're real and they care about what they say and they're interesting and they're different. Could they all sustain an album? I don't know. Probably not. That's what a good compilation is about. And they did a wonderful job of gathering these great recordings.
And the Music Maker Relief Foundation, which is behind this record, if you go to their Bandcamp, you'll see they have at least 8 other albums that they've put out, one of which is another compilation album that I've spent some time with, of nothing but versions of Amazing Grace. The version of Amazing Grace that shows up on Hanging Tree Guitars is in fact also on that compilation. And it's quite excellent. But you're talking about the protest nature of this record. Songs like the very first track, Slavery Time Blues. Songs like, is it Turning Point, that is about whether or not America has in fact reached a turning point?
Oh, yeah. Well, in addition to those records, there is a book called Hanging Trees Guitar, which is mostly interviews with Freeman Vines, but also there's interviews with locals from eastern North Carolina, which is not the North Carolina we think of. That's not the Research Triangle. North Carolina, it's 150, 200 miles to the east of that. And apparently, most of the white people are not as progressive as the people in Charlotte, put it that way. I'm sure there's a few exceptions. But when they talk about lynching, they don't want to even talk about it. They're afraid that the grandchildren of the people who did the lynching back in the 30s and 40s might come get them in some way, run them out of town, if not actually lynch them. And that book is also really remarkable. Most of it's Freeman Vines talking about how he does his work, which is also really interesting. And the photographs are fabulous in that book.
So let's talk about another very different kind of guitar record. And I just want to note for a moment that in your top 10, half of it could be described as guitar records. There's the 2 we're talking about here. There's also Lucinda Williams. There's Dramarama. There's Wussy. So guitar fans have something to celebrate here, or rock fans, as it were. But tell me a little bit about this Groupe 2 and Chevaux record.
Well, Groupe 2 is from the Sahara. In particular, I believe they are from Agadez, which is a city in Niger, where a lot of African guitarists listened to a lot of Jimi Hendrix and then started playing guitar in a way that doesn't sound much like Jimi Hendrix at all, but also doesn't sound like other African guitar. And there are many different great African guitar traditions, Franco and Congo being the greatest, along with Franco. But this is very loud and strident music, more loud and strident than any guitar music that I like. I mean, I suppose there's lots of metal and death metal bands that can be described in that way, but I much prefer this stuff, just sonically. Groupe 2 is one of those bands. A guy named Bombino actually recorded here in the United States and looked like he might have a career and probably still has something of a career. I hope he does. But Groupe 2 went to Paris, and they're just sort of getting by in Paris, and they ran into this, what's always called a punk band, but it isn't really a punk band. It's just a rock band called Cheveux. And then they went and were somehow persuaded. I don't know how it worked, how it happened. They went to a city in what used to be called Spanish Morocco. It's still disputed territory. Is it part of Mali? Is it part of Morocco? Nobody really knows. But this is on the coast, right on the Atlantic coast. They spent about 10 days together making a record, and apparently they didn't have a lot of fun. There was a lot of conflict when they made this record. They didn't get along together as well as they expected to. Whether any of this had to do with race, I don't know. I doubt it. Not in any kind of fundamental way, for sure.
Musically, those groups are, obviously different, and that's part of what's
interesting. And then you hear different kinds of approaches to guitar, all clashing and coming together. For me, the fundamental problem in this deeply troubled, with many other problems, country remains slavery and what happened to it. What happened to it in the Civil War when it was abolished, what happened to it immediately after the Civil War when the first impeached President Andrew Johnson, who was a white guy from Tennessee that Lincoln put on the ticket because he needed his whatever it was, Al Gore or whatever. No, Joe Lieberman.
What you're talking about is the way in which white supremacy, having been defeated in the Civil War, reasserted itself in American politics in the Reconstruction era.
Immediately. Reconstruction was a joke. Completely killed in another disputed election of one of 1876. What's called Jim Crow and the stuff that all those people in Hanging Tree Guitars are worried about. The lynching, which there was a lynching postcard fad. People sent around pictures of lynchings from one to another. And then, we had the desegregation decision in 1954, and it was tremendously important, as was the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which now they've rolled back and are going to try to roll back more in the next couple of years. So I found that this simultaneous cooperation and conflict of this record really spoke to me. It had spoke to me before I knew that was what I was hearing. I had no idea. The first time I played this record, I woke up from a nap. I do that to myself. So I can really hear, I'm in a kind of this empty spiritual space that you get when you wake up.
So I think longtime Bob Christgau fans might recognize that I believe Have Mercy is another record that involved nap time. Do I have that wrong?
It wasn't quite the same thing, but yes.
Okay, but they both involve naps. You got to give me credit for that.
Yeah, but then I just lay down and I listened to it. I don't think I slept because I was
so you're in this liminal space and you hear this group
and I hear these two
record.
guitars. I said, "Holy shit, this is amazing!" I don't know which track it was because I could hear the different guitars clashing with each other. Did I know exactly what they were? No, I didn't. All I knew at that time was that I loved how much simultaneous harmony or cooperation and conflict you could hear in this music, because that's what the racial situation in the United States seems to me to be about.
Okay, Rob, I want to go to you, and I want to, continuing on the theme of music that, well, in my case, I hadn't heard, although I know a lot of people have heard this record. There's a record in your top 10 that Bob and I hadn't heard. It's Lomelda's Hannah. Tell me a little bit about that one and why it's a top 10 record this year for you.
Please tell us.
I love
We've
that
tried.
record.
I know.
You tried and you didn't like it.
Oh, many times. 4 or 5.
But let's hear from you, Rob. Why is that one a top 10 record for you this year?
I love it. Lomelda has always been great at doing songs that seem on the surface like they're personal, introspective. They tend to be more funny and more the self-mocking, self-laceration that's built into that kind of introspective songwriting, which is inseparable from the guitar. And it's a funny guitar record if you like the idea of emotional songs plus funny guitar. It's just a fantastic.
And it's just her and her guitar?
No, there's a full band.
It's a band record. But let me ask you a question. How big is the shaded area in the Venn diagram between the funniness of this indie rock record and what has come to be called sad girl music?
I think certainly the sad girl lineage is very present. For those of you who happen to be 90s people, if we could put it so crudely, there's certainly a lot of Lois, for one, on this record, although she didn't have guitar solos. But the Rose Melberg lineage is extremely live and kicking these days. And the Lomelda record, every year there's a few records that are basically like that, where Rose Melberg is their big Joe Turner.
I'm sorry,
basically.
I don't remember who Rose Melberg is. And I was alive
She was
in the 90s.
The Softies in the 90s. And before that, she was in Tiger Trap. Those were collaborative bands, but she was the main songwriting focus in both those bands. It's kind of amazing that after a period where it seemed like that sort of tributary of 90s indie rock had fallen into a void culturally, around 7 or 8 years ago, I began to notice more and more bands for whom Rose Melberg was a total titan to them and really the fountainhead of the kind of music that they were trying to make. As a friend of mine put it a few years ago, Rose Melberg invented sad girl. The way that sort of lineage has gone through all these transmutations with all these different bands in recent years.
I like funny girl music and angry girl music and smart girl music, but I've never liked sad girl music, which a term I only learned about, which I guess it's a very old term, when talking about this stuff with Joe in the past 4 or 5 months.
I don't think it's that old a term. It's in vogue right now. If you go to your Spotify, you can find a sad girl playlist. Rob, you've been on the Flux Pod podcast.
Yes, which I love.
There's an excellent episode of Flux Pod that's all about sad girl. Have you heard that one?
Yeah, it's great.
It's fantastic. It helped me a lot. But this is a catch-all that isn't a sound. It's more a mood, because if you're going to put Lana Del Rey in there, there's nothing that connects Lana with a lot of the other music that might be talked about here.
That's smart girl music.
Easy now, Tiger.
Far from mutually exclusive. I mean, the whole basic underpinning of sad girl music is that it's almost always also funny girl music. The softies were always great and witty. That sort of comes from the Go-Betweens worship that saturates this whole scene. The Go-Betweens, a band that you go way back with. The line between the Go-Betweens and Lamelda is not tenuous.
Really?
Two questions here.
I'm
One
going to
is,
have to play it loud while my wife is in the room. She loves the Go-Betweens as much as I do.
actually,
If not
let's back
more.
up a little here because, Rob, something that you've talked about in the past is that Consumer Guide was always good if you were looking at the totality of the entries of pointing you to the right place to enter the catalog. So if you're entering the Lamelda catalog for the first time, is this the record to do it? Or is this a record that has more meaning? You're going to find out what I think by the time I finish this question. If you've already formed a relationship with the other records and with Hannah herself as a songwriter.
No, I think this is definitely the one to start with. It is called Hannah. That's the name of the songwriter. I've loved Hannah. I've loved basically those records for a few years, but this is definitely my favorite. And also it's the best one to start if you're just starting to listen to the band.
Okay, I'm going to be playing it again, probably at breakfast, and we'll see what the real arbiter of taste in my house has to say about it. Either she'll say, "Oh, what is that?" Or she won't notice it. Well, those are the two possibilities.
Since Rob's said that sad girl music is also funny girl music, we should talk about the sad girl breakout album of the year, which is also funny girl music, which would be Phoebe Bridgers, which is another one that is on your end list, Rob.
You see, I made that an honorable mention, and I agree. I can certainly see why people think she's great. She's a little too understated for my personal taste, but she's good for sure.
Well, she does so many different types of songs. It's difficult to generalize about that record because the range of moods and tones on that record is so huge, much more, I think, than one might superficially absorb on a first listen or second listen. But the fact that Garden Song and Kyoto are on the same record is kind of wild in itself. Kyoto, a hugely funny song that is about, among other things, being bored playing music on the road, being mildly amused by the differences in cultures and nations that one notices, and processing family trauma, getting a phone call from somebody in your past that you are nowhere near ready to have the conversation with. All those things are jumbled up together in a way that it sounds chatty and reassociative when you hear it, but it's incredibly crafty, calculated songwriting. Just the level of guile that goes into a song like Kyoto and making it feel kind of casual and offhand. She's on tour in Japan. She's bored out of her mind. She is using a payphone. She's like, "Oh, it's so funny. They still have payphones here." The conversation she has on that payphone turns out to have nothing to do with the tour, nothing to do with being in a band. It takes her back to very miserable places in her past that she really wishes weren't following her all over the world, 3,000 miles from home. It's just like an ingenious song that nonetheless is designed to sound like it's just filling out and falling together as she sings it. That's something she specializes in. Garden Song is a really spooky song about having morbid nightmares about racists in your neighborhood.
Well, I mean, I must say, I gave it its 2 stars after really admiring the Christmas record on which she didn't write any of the songs at all, which introduced me to McCarthy Trenching, among other things, one of the greatest Christmas songs I've ever heard in my life. Sadness comes crashing like a brick through your window, and there's no one to fix it because it's Christmas. That's a great Christmas song. And she was in that trio, right? That Sad Girl trio, which had its own...
Boy Genius?
Yeah, right, which I tried so hard with Boy Genius, and I just didn't get it. But now, I mean, your description makes me think I got to get back to Spotify and maybe even buy the CD just out of respect, because it makes a difference for me to actually own the physical object. It is a different experience than streaming it.
I want to pause here for a second. So, Rob, because I've heard Bob talk about this a lot, I did not know this. You like having the physical object.
Yeah, the artifact. It's silly to talk about neutral media. If you're hearing something, where and when you're hearing it makes a difference. I find that having a physical object to focus on changes the listening. With streaming, honestly, I listen to the beginnings of lots of songs. A song reminds me of another song, and I click to another song. I rarely get all the way to the end listening on a streaming service. I won't mention any of them by name because none of them are paying me to. But I find that having a tape or a record or a CD that I am listening to and I put it on to listen to, it concentrates the mind, it concentrates the body, it concentrates the ears. In yoga, they call it a drishti. I believe, Joe, is that the term?
I don't know.
The drishti that you focus on when you're staring at. I hate to be using yoga terms around Joe. He knows his stuff.
No, it's totally fine, man. I just didn't expect it. I didn't know that you were going to drop Sanskrit today. I was really unprepared for the yoga side of you. Although, given your height, yoga would be good for your back long term. I completely agree and support that particular.
All kinds of wisdom flowing today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But drishti, it focuses the body and the mind and the concentration.
Well, I mean, the way I say it is it objectifies the music. It makes it something that's outside of your head. It exists in the physical world in a way that streaming just doesn't psychologically. That's how I find it to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. I won't buy it from Amazon.
You won't buy it from Amazon. Not only are you going to buy Phoebe Bridgers, but you're not going to buy it from Amazon. So
I'm not
all
buy
sorts
it from
of
Amazon.
good
The only reason
I
really feel bad about buying from Amazon, but if you're a critic, Amazon's delivery speed is enormously important.
You can get it from her website. It's like buying it at the merch table at the show. That's where the artist gets
Exactly. I don't want to give anybody too many ideas, but it is Friday and it's Bandcamp Friday, so you could do that too. But
Excellent idea.
Bob, I want to come back to you and back to your list and ask you about 3 records by the same artist on your list, and that would be the Black Thought EPs.
Yeah, well, I thought these records didn't get reviewed at all. That's actually not true. You go to Metacritic and you find a few reviews, especially for the first one. I spent a lot of time just sort of trolling for stuff. Trolling? Is it trolling? Is it trolling? Maybe it's
You're
trolling.
Probably trolling.
I read in some other review a reference to a Black Thought EP, download-only EP. It was in early 2020. This was in 2018. I said, what? Black Thought put out a record? I didn't hear it? So I went and I listened to it, and I thought it was great.
These are all called Streams of Thought. It's Streams of Thought volumes 1 through 3. I think the first one is 2018.
They're both 2018. Early and very late 2018. And then he finally got himself a contract, and it was supposed to come out in July, and it didn't come out till October or November with Universal. The second one, which I think was the least noticed of the 3, that I happen to think is the best. I think that's just happenstance, but that's how it works. So that was a full A and my number 11 record of the year.
So what is it about that record, or these records in particular?
Well, what is it about Black Thought? What it is about Black Thought is that he's old school, that he's a genuine intellectual, as rappers go, for sure. He reads. He has a song about Dostoevsky that he's written. You read interviews with him. He's a very literate guy. He's also a man in his late 40s or early 50s, is involved in a enduring relationship that has its problems, which is something I'd like to see done right, and he does it right. He's a great rapper. I can't remember who he does the music with now. I don't know those names as well. Salam Remy? I don't know who that is, but I'm sure that helps. Why these records were ignored, it baffles me. It baffles me the way people talk about, Public Enemy just put out a really good protest record in 2020 and it got a little review. They've been putting out really good protest records every 2-3 years for this entire century. And it's like they didn't exist anymore. I'm 78 years old. It's all a continuum for me, and it's not for most of the people who are writing about music. Something that happened in 1990 is like, Country blues, I guess, must have been for me. Happened before I was born. Talk about cancel. In a much more literal way, it seems to block the currency of the music that people continue to make as they age for younger people. Certainly one of the themes of my criticism for the last 20 years has been how many people, sure, most of them just get boring or repeat themselves or were never that interesting to begin with. But there are older artists who continue to make good record. Willie Nelson has cut some 20, 25 albums since he was 80. And yeah, a lot of them are songbooks in which he does the Frank Sinatra, and they're just okay because he's a great singer, and it's not bad to have a great singer singing these great songs. But then every once in a while, he really hits it good. Once again, now people are noticing that a little bit because he's 86. Okay, all right. That is kind of a big deal, people say. But for me, people make good records at 50, and Black Thought is doing that.
So just circling back, Salam Remy, well-known producer, worked with Nas, is on both of the Amy Winehouse albums. So if you've heard him before, it was on Winehouse's Back to Black, many other credits there. But he's a mainstream R&B and hip-hop producer. He is certainly well-known.
Oh, well, I'm sure. Joe, I just don't keep track of all this stuff. There's no way to
Bob,
do that.
that's one of the things I'm here for. And I do pay a little too much attention to.
I probably did look them up once. I mean, that thing is with Google, you can find out what you want to find about almost anybody. So I probably did look at it, but it didn't end up entering my 120-word review.
So, Rob, coming back to you and your list, I want to ask you about two albums, two very different records, both of which unfold in different ways under the shadow of Beyonce. And that would be Chloe and Haley's Ungodly Hour and Rina Sawayama's Sawayama.
Yeah, those are fantastic records. Chloe and Haley, they come from that late 90s Southern R&B verging on psychedelia moment. I associated with the second Aaliyah album, the second SWV album. A detail about their lives that I love is that one of them was born while the number one song was The Boy Is Mine, and the other one was born while the number one song was Say My Name. And that's very much the musical vein. But
they themselves as sisters are like a versus battle.
Yes, totally.
Did you write about this record, Rob?
Yeah.
Did you review it for Rolling Stone or somebody?
No, it was like just a long sustaining, like a record that I listened to and loved more all year long. The title song is definitely in that psychedelic zone that I'm talking about.
Because it was so high on your list, I have streamed that many times without it denting me to where I would buy the CD.
I would focus on the title song, Ungodly Hour, and listen to that 3 or 4 times in a row.
All right, I'll give that a try. I'm writing that down.
You know, Rob, I was so excited when you mentioned SWV because this record, which I played a bunch before it got to me, when I came to like it as what I'm going to call a high generic R&B album. And I don't mean that as an insult at all. If one of these songs came on, I'm not sure I would say right away, oh, that sounds like Chloe and Halle. It has a sound. There are a lot of big name producers working on this. Mike Will Made It has a track. Scott Storch and Soundwave are on it. I want to give a special shout out to my man Giddy, who moved here from Moldavia, grew up in New Haven, and apparently learned to speak English by listening to Beatles records. But to me, what was really interesting about it is one of the first tracks that clicked for me was one of the ones they produced themselves. So one of the self-produced tracks, I'm forgetting the name. It's Tipsy. That's the name of it.
Great song.
It's really good.
Okay. Ungodly Hour and Tipsy.
So
I'm writing them both down.
Help, because I said this in the intro, help people understand the Beyonce connection here.
They're Beyonce proteges. They made a record a couple years ago that was very much a teen pop R&B record. It was two very talented teenage sisters from Atlanta doing a very Beyonce-ish kind of pop record that was certainly a very good record, but it wasn't anywhere near this one. This one, it's a huge leap. It's a real creative breakthrough for them. But they're Beyonce proteges who've gone from imitation and homage to doing free-thinking creative work in that R&B to hip hop to pop zone. They're picking up the creative torch from her in a lot of different ways.
Well, you know, when they were very young, when they were just, I don't even know if they were preteen at this point, they have small parts in a Beyonce movie, The Fighting Temptations. I don't know how many of you have that saved on your Netflix or Amazon Prime lists.
If you have it, it's probably a VHS tape, right?
They are now signed to her label, Parkland.
Yes.
I'm just going to say something mean. I will listen more to the Chloe and Halle record.
There's always time for that, Bob, please. Rob, there was another record I mentioned, which I also think unfolds in a very different way under the shadow of Beyonce, and that's the Rina Sawayama record.
Yeah, Rina's record is fantastic. She's someone who has been around for a few years. It's the first time she's made a full-on album that is a wonderful statement. It's very much in a Y2K era, Total Request Live reruns vision where she's got these Y2K era teen pop songs in a very self-consciously glossy disco mode with all these bursts of new metal guitar. In terms of the musical concepts of the record, it's wildly funny. STFU is one of the funniest rock songs of the past year or the past few years. As the title suggests, she's gently suggesting that you shut the fuck up. She's not so gentle in her suggestion. Apologies for my language, but that's
we'll never forgive you.
But it's just a really great, mean, sarcastic, rude song. There's no happy ending to that song. It's just a fantastic album. It's one that I came to the album because I loved the song, and there are a few individual songs I loved. I ended up playing like the whole album and loving the whole thing.
So she's just 30 years old, I believe born in Japan, grew up in England, Cambridge educated, I think. When she talks about it, she talks about that 2000 vibe. She talks a lot about Christina. She talks about Britney. She mentions Beyonce. But when I listen to this record, the pop vibe I get is much more like Destiny's Child, Writing on the Wall, that stutter pop sound that they more or less created on that record. And then that Pharrell steals and makes Britney Spears songs with.
Wow.
Excellent point.
Joe, why are we interviewing you? That's really something what you just said.
That's
Rob,
amazing.
can you think of another record where someone has combined those two modes, that Deftones guitar approach and a pop melody approach?
Definitely not. And it's funny that it took this long for somebody to come up with such a great concept, the glory days of TRL. For those of you who don't happen to remember, there was this great moment where it was like an updated American Bandstand for the late 90s, early 2000s, where every afternoon in the same American Bandstand time slot, the after school spot, there would be a countdown with listener requests on MTV hosted by the great Carson Daly. Probably 2/3 of them would be straight up disco songs sung by girls, and the other third would be angry new metal songs by Korn or Limp Bizkit. And if somebody else did this before, I would love to know who, but she was, why not have both in the same song? So the verses are like a Britney, Christina, Max Martin in sync song. And then the choruses turn into Limp Bizkit or Korn. And I have to say, this is a record that I listened to and I thought, I've been waiting to hear this for 20 years. Why did it take so long for somebody to have this genius idea?
So Rob, side note, but was Carson Daly still in the Tara Reid era when you wrote about him for Rolling Stone?
Yes. Yes,
Oh,
she was filming a new movie that I thought sounded amazing. Little did we know it would go on to be one of the great rock and roll movies of this century, Josie and the Pussycats. And I said, just the fact
there's something I agree with you on. That is a good movie.
Yes, that was the first I heard of it. And I said, just the fact that they're making a remake of Josie and the Pussycats with Tara Reid and Rosario Dawson, I was like, I like this upcoming century. Bring it on. Maybe a little optimistic, but
right. I'll say, but
in those terms, Josie and the Pussycats. Also, it's mind blowing for me how many of the artists that I love now making guitar music are women who started playing guitar because they saw the Josie and the Pussycats movie, including
that's certainly
including someone who's pretty high on your list, Bob, Sadie from Sad 13, and also Speedy Ortiz.
Now, is that documented? That Josie and the Pussycats was an inspiration for her, as opposed to, say, Slater Kinney. You know,
well,
can I have Slater Kinney, please? Can I have
course,
Bikini Kill? Can I have no?
You know who wrote some of the songs on the Josie and the Pussycat soundtrack?
No,
my old friend Anna Warrenker.
That's different.
And That Dog is another 90s band that had a guitar.
Sure.
Like, I didn't know they were going to have a resurgence. I mean, they made a new record. It's an excellent new record. I contributed.
Good band, That Dog.
To the fundraiser on that record. You know, when the Waxahachie album 2 albums ago came out, it was very much, I thought, oh my God, this sounds exactly like That Dog. And then Katie Crutchfield on tour had a little That Dog drawing. She graffitied her own guitar with a little drawing of the band. I think it was a drawing of Anna. And I only know this because they turned up on Insta together with that guitar. So listen, guys, I've asked you some questions about your respective lists. I want to invite you to ask each other about albums we haven't covered. And God knows there are a lot of them. Rob, is there anything on Bob's list you want to know more about?
Yeah, a record that you like a lot that I also like a lot, the Sad 13 record.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk about that one a bit. As we were talking about the legacy of the Josie and the Pussycat soundtrack, this is just one of the many tributaries of that.
Well, this is Sadie Dupuis, who began, I'm pretty sure, by considering herself a poet who occasionally would play music, and only then she found out she was playing music in 2 different bands.
Patti Smith only had one.
Sad 13 being the more personal one, supposedly. I've never really understood the difference. And Speedy Ortiz, a wonderful name for a band, more the band one. I don't really hear the distinction very clearly myself. And what I proposed in my review of this record is that she just now renamed Speedy Ortiz Sad 13, or vice versa would be fine too. Speedy Ortiz is a better name for a band. and then just do whatever the hell she wants under that guise. She's done 4 records. I like all 4 of them, but I think this is probably the best of the 4. I reviewed the 2016 one because I didn't even know Sad 13 existed until she put out this record, which came out just before the pandemic.
There wasn't a lot of time last year before the pandemic.
Or was it just before something else? I don't remember what it was.
Well, there was a lot of things happening in 2020 where you could say just before.
It's definitely a pre-pandemic record because there are lots of songs about not wanting to go out to rock shows anymore. Now that's like listening to folk song about tuberculosis or something. I remember feeling like really annoyed when the opening band wouldn't go on before midnight.
Oh, yeah.
Wish I had that problem now. Market Hotel is a great song like that. Chasing the Ghost of a Good Time is another one. I love that Sad 13 record. Since we were talking about her influences, I can't help mentioning that she's a Stephen Malkmus obsessive who used to play in a tribute band called Pavement, which was an all-female Pavement cover band. Yes.
What a great idea.
Yes. Just one of the many great bands she's been in.
So, Bob, is there a record on Rob's list that you were curious about?
Yeah, well, one I'm just curious about because I can't find it. Okay. That's the Jarvis Cocker and Jarv Is, Beyond the Pale. How does one hear this record? It's not on Spotify that I could find. They don't pay me either, and I think they're bad people, but that's what I use.
I'm going to send you the link, but yeah, it's on Spotify.
Oh, it is? All right, I'm sorry. Then let's go on to Little Uzi Vert.
No. Hold on. I got to defend Rob here because constitutionally, if you bring up Jarvis Cocker and don't give Rob a chance to talk about it, it's as though antimatter has met matter and Thanos has all of the...
Oh, yeah, right.
It's going to be the end of the fucking world.
All right.
Part of what I love about that record is it's a perfect pandemic record that came out before anybody knew there was going to be a pandemic, because lots of the songs are a few years on in life from where Sadie Dupuis is. Jarvis Cocker is like, wow, I've tried staying home and not going to rock shows and it sucks. And lots of the songs are about, I hate being alone in the house every night. This completely sucks.
Oh, dear.
Why did I break up with that person? Why did I let that
why did he? I'm very sorry for him.
With the shows? It's kind of amazing. If you're looking for a place to start with that record, the whole album's great, but the banger is house music all night long. It's not about going to a club and hearing house music. It's about sitting in your kitchen listening to your old disco records, and you are listening to house music all night long because you're just listening to the sound of your own kitchen. As he says, it's one nation under a roof. There's a great line, God damn this claustrophobia, I should be disrobing ya. It's a song about just sitting in your kitchen, listening to the sounds of your house filter with the sounds of these disco records, thinking of all the parties that you're not having and all the people that you're not dancing with. Just a fantastic song about sustained music fandom past after youth is gone, which is one of his great subjects.
How old is Cocker now? He's pushing 50, right?
He's into his late 50s, I say.
Late 50s?
I think he was born in 63.
Wow.
What? He's older than I am? Jarvis Cocker is older than I am?
Part of what made him such a brilliant pop star is that by the time he became a huge success, like with Pulp in the 90s, he was already 30. So he'd already had his time to figure out what he did and didn't want to do and what he was and wasn't good at. And that's why he was so great at being a pop star, because he'd been practicing in his bedroom mirror for 20 years at that point.
All right. So quick question. Is this a Jarvis Cocker record, or is there another band called Jarv Is? I get confused.
He formed a band which he calls Jarv Is.
Okay.
Which is silly. On some level, he should have just called it Jarvis Cocker. There's personal reasons for that, honestly, because succinctly, he made a couple of solo records under his name, Jarvis Cocker, and his main collaborator was his guitar player, and the guitar player died, and he felt like it wasn't really a Jarvis Cocker record without his guitar player collaborator. But also it's moving that even though it's his name, he felt like it wasn't a Jarvis Cocker record.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
So a beautiful gesture. At first I was like, why didn't also Jarvis is kind of a silly band name, but it's kind of a thing where he took a few years off from making music. He was a DJ on the BBC. He did the Sunday evening light entertainment set, which was a fantastic.
Didn't people put out mixtape kind of albums of stuff he played on that? I seem to remember playing one of those.
Yeah, it was a fantastic show, and he was great. And he eventually put a band together with Bob. Try to control your wince of pain in advance. Like when I say that he has a harp player in this band, I do not mean a blues harmonica. I mean that there is a harpist in this band. It's a terrible
Listen to
idea.
Joanna Newsom,
Songs
it's
sound
okay
great.
with me.
There we go. There, that's Rob
was-
poked the bear, and he was waiting for that to come out.
Yes, I got the wince I was hoping for. But the band is fantastic. Also, like part of it is he was playing a lot of festivals with this band, and a lot of the songs were composed and to a large extent recorded while they were vamping on these songs live in front of festivals. And when he put this record out, it was already like during the quarantine, and he said, well, it's really weird that this was a record that was to a large extent a live record. It was composed and recorded on stage in front of an audience. And he said, had no idea that it was the last chance we'd have to make a record like that for a long time.
Yeah, now people are just making live album. Well, I don't know how many people are doing it, but this country singer I've always liked, who's kind of obscure, named Sonny Sweeney, a great lyricist with a dirty mind and a difficult personality. I mean, that's all in the music. I have no idea if that's really who she is, though I would guess that it probably is. Anyway, she decided to make an album, a live album in a studio which had seating capacity, only there was nobody there, because she had a bunch of new songs she wanted to sing, and it's on my list, and I really recommend it. And of course, I mean, I can tell you that several other records were basically cut live from my list. One was Hamill on Trial, who I have kind of a relationship with, although I almost never watch any of these web music things. So, every once in a while.
You mean live stream concerts during the pandemic or not your thing?
No, well, for one thing, I'm not on Facebook, and so we have to sit around Carola's computer. We haven't figured out how to put it on the big screen and stuff like that. Anyway, Hamill told me that he was going to be doing a bunch of pandemic songs. He set himself the job of writing a new song every day and then recording them 2 weeks later. I watched this thing with his son doing the tech. Son's now in college out in California, but smart kid named Detroit. I thought that enough of them were good that I called him up. I had his number. We got along very well when I did it. It was the last feature I did for The Voice. It was about him. Oh, no, The Dolls was after that. But anyway, I liked the song so much that I talked him into doing an album of this stuff. He re-recorded it, but he recorded it at home with Detroit doing the tech. Sauce Tech's label put it out.
So, Bob, did you get
pandemic songs?
Did you get A&R credit or executive producer credit on that record?
No, but I think maybe I mentioned somewhere. When I actually am involved with the music, I gave that a B+. I said, no, it's not really an A-. No. And I really struggled over it. And I said, all right, he's your pal, make it a B+. But I was wrong.
There are all these musicians listening who are scratching "Become Friends with Bob Christgau" off of their list. So many people were like, "I was going to do this. I was going to bring over some Ruggla."
No, well, on the other hand, I did make what was essentially a mixtape by my favorite band in the world, Wussy, made my top 10, and I really recommend it. So it's not complete. Anyway, I mean, I just know I did underrate the record. And in fact, a fan of mine suggested that I play it again. And I did, and boy, it sounded so good at the end of the year. This was, when was it out? June, July? To hear an album of songs that are really angry about the virus 6 months later, it was very satisfying. I liked it more and more the more I listened to it.
I learned about that record from the Consumer Guide, grade notwithstanding. Same with the Low Cut Connie record, which you're right about. That one is great.
Yeah, as Joe said, there's been 2 good Springsteen records recently, and neither of them is by Springsteen. Because we, unlike you, Rob, really don't like this Springsteen album. It seems so pallid. I love the guy. I gave his Broadway album an A. I thought it was great. Basically, just the musical comedy version of his great autobiography.
I just want to say, all over the world, there are people who are like, wait, Bruce Springsteen made a Broadway musical comedy record? Wow. I didn't know he and Mel Brooks were working together.
He did a Broadway show that was very hard to get into. I decided not to kiss the ring or wherever it was I had to do, so I never saw it.
You had to email Mark Satloff and then pay for the tickets. It was pretty simple. But that said, shout out to Mark Satloff. I don't go to Broadway
shows. What the tickets cost? What, $600 or something?
The tickets were very expensive, but we digress here. Listen, fellas, I want to step out of the year-end list for a second and ask you a question about right now. What are you guys listening to right now? And that doesn't have to be a record that is brand new, but what have you been turning to for comfort during this winter longer than the one Bill Murray lived through in Groundhog Day? Rob, let's start with you.
Okay. The 80s James Brown reissues, which were so formative for listeners, James Brown fans of my generation, from the era when, as Bob wrote about extensively at the time when James Brown was becoming the great rock and roller, not just one of the great ones. Doing It to Death compilation of 70 to 73 stuff.
Oh, that stuff is really wonderful.
Yes.
Holy shit, that stuff is great.
And that was a cassette that I used to have that got lost in the shuffle. But I found somebody on Discogs who was selling the old school 80s cassette of it. It starts with, there it is. I'm a greedy man. Make it funky. I got a bag of my own. I got ants in my pants and I need to dance.
Well, all those are just great tracks.
Yes. And so you can have Watergate, but give me some bucks and I'll be straight. Finding this beloved old 80s tape, which was so formative in terms of development of music in the 80s and 90s, a compilation that in itself was such a huge artifact, but also a very huge part of my life. So finding it on tape again, which is how I really wanted to listen to it again. I can't lie, that's been my most played album.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say my cassette player doesn't seem to work anymore.
Hey, Rob, fill us in. Why on tape?
It's a way of concentrating. We were talking before about physical media and the artifact. It has nothing to do with sentimental value. It has to do with ways of concentrating. When you concentrate on an album, you're concentrating for 20 minutes at a time because you change sides. It breaks the spell.
So another question down this route. If you're out and you walk into, you and I have gone for long walks in Greenpoint, so long that I think we went to Kew Gardens, Queens. So if you're out and you stop in a secondhand store and you see a Walkman, do you just immediately buy the Walkman so that you never run out of them? Are you stockpiling these things?
Well, they're not hard to find.
That's why I asked. I know they're not hard to find.
They're durable. Like this one, 2002, still spins, still plays, still works.
How many of them do you have?
I have 3 or 4.
I think I have a couple.
There's one that I just bought at a random chain drugstore in Queens a couple of years ago because I was with my iPod. I happen to love the iPod. What an amazing invention that is. Love that they stopped
I love it too.
Yes. The fact that they stopped making the iPod is to me, one of the most brilliant reasons not to trust putting other people in charge of your musical archives. I really relate to Chris Rock when he made the joke about still having CDs. He said, when the government shuts down the cloud, I'm going to still have Luther. That's how I feel. When they shut down the cloud,
when they shut down the cloud, you're still going to have all the volumes of now that's what I call music, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
All 80, 60, 12 of them. Something I love about the tape as a way of concentrating on music is it's 45 minutes for a side of a tape, as opposed to 20 minutes for an album. Listening to an album, you're flipping the vinyl every 20 minutes. Bob, I think you wrote something brilliant once about how listening to 45s like diapers, you have to change them every couple of minutes. So,
I said that? Well, that was pretty smart.
It's a great line. For me, I find that tape with 45 minutes on each side is the perfect way to listen to music all day. Joe, I apologize for quoting something that Jack White said to you in an interview, but I quote this all the time to myself. But he was talking about vinyl, and he said, it's a campfire. And I was like, that is the absolute best description I've ever heard. I have to give it up to Jack White and give it up to you that you recognize this quote for the great Jack White aphorism that it is. You sit, you watch the record spin, it's going around. It's a campfire. We're sitting around a campfire. We're participating in it. It's a shrine that you take music to and get music out of.
Listen, you don't have to give me any respect on that. That guy, everything is so tightly controlled. I wouldn't be surprised if he had all that shit written out like days before I got there. Bob, let's go to you. What's a record or a band that you've turned to recently and taken some joy
I would say that, I spend so much of my time trolling. I still think the word is troll. Trolling for Consumer Guide records. Carola likes jazz and blues and Latin dance music. If it's the morning and we're having breakfast together, I try to play something I think she'll like. I said, no, there's records I've given Ace to. I have no memory whatsoever of what they are. And so I'm in the K's a lot because there's a lot of African music that has K. I see this record, Kaito, Kaito. Now, I know if it's a full CD as opposed to one I put one of those skinny sleeves. I use skinny sleeves for stuff that isn't A, and I keep the jewel case.
So just for people who haven't been over to your house, if it's in a jewel case, that means it's better than if you've taken it out of the jewel case and put it in
a little vinyl sleeve.
Little sleeve.
Which I still have 300 or 400 left. I hope they still sell them when I run out. So I see this record that's Kaito amid this African-dominated K section.
So and there with Conda Bongo Man.
I played it. And I had no idea what it would sound like, but I knew I'd given it an A. In fact, I think I double-checked just in case I'd made a mistake at my website. My sister, who lives in my apartment house, and not only do I get to talk to my wife all the time, poor solo people, but I get to talk to my sister and brother-in-law who live upstairs from me and who are safe. They have the antibodies, blah, blah, blah. She was down talking to us. So there were two people whose musical taste I really respect. Both of them published rock critics, Georgia Christgau and Carola DeBell. I put on this Cato record, and we all love it. It sounds like a high-energy, somewhat more abrasive version of OK, a childish group that came out of Athens, which featured Michael Stipe's little sister, and who are such a cult group that they put out everything they'd ever done, plus a live show. And Carola and I actually wrote the liner notes to that. It's now, I just looked it up, and you can't buy it. It costs $45 or $50 if you can find a used copy. But they've just put out a
Costs more
vinyl
once
version.
this comes out, when all your fans go nuts and buy up the ones remaining. You just jacked up the price.
But there's a vinyl version. If you like vinyl, I really can't stand vinyl myself
The price
anymore.
just dipped a little. Hold on. I'm watching this whole thing like a GameStop over here.
We'll come back to that. You can't stand vinyl.
So this morning, however, I played Cato, and then I played OK at breakfast. OK sounded better. I mean, really, folks, you buy vinyl even if I don't. I think it's inconvenient. It's a lot cheaper than the CD. Reward them for putting OK out there again. I think you can test drive it on your streaming service of choice before then. Carola was quoting lyrics and remembering little things. She wrote most of that review, those liner notes. I don't think they're on our side.
Do you remember what band you name check in the Consumer Guide review of this Cato record?
No.
It's another beloved band, Lilliput.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. That's a nice trio, Cato, OK, and Lilliput. Lilliput was older Swiss women. One of my anthologies, Grown Up All Wrong, there's a whole piece about them. They were a girl punk band who weren't very punky. They were quieter, popper than that, although they were neither quiet or pop. They just weren't
They
punk.
might even be better known as Kleenex, which was their original name.
That's right. Their first name was Kleenex. That's correct.
They had to change. If you haven't read this piece, this is one of the all-time Christgau greatest hits by me. This essay on Lilliput, Kleenex, a band that were very much forgotten, written out of history by 1993. As you pointed out, they were dropped from the most recent edition of the Trouser Press Record Guide because they weren't historically important enough. It was a great proselytizing piece where, for those of us who might know a couple of stray Lilliput/Kleenex tracks from compilations, you began with the address that you write to, and you're like, okay, first send a check to this, and it's some address in Switzerland. Like so many people at the time, I did. That's the only possible way I would have heard this compilation, which is now a lot easier to find, but those were pre-internet times. But in terms of all-time great canon rewriting, but also sheer devout personal fandom, proselytizing, this is one of my all-time favorite Christgau essays.
Which is unfortunately not online because it was included in my Harvard University Press collection, Grown Up All Wrong, where in order for them to publish it as a book, I had to sign something, not only that I would never put it on tape or anything, but that it would never, ever be reproduced in any form of anything that ever exists in the universe.
You can find this on bookshop.com. There's lots of alternatives to the...
What is bookshop.com? I don't even know what that is.
It's a place to buy books online that is not...
Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
To be blunt.
All right. So with that plug for reading, because it is fundamental, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to push pause on this right now. As I said at the top, we're hoping to do more of these than we did last year. So hopefully you'll hear from us soon. And Rob, if we do end up doing more, I hope you'll come back for a 5th or 6th visit.
Yeah, because it's always good to talk to you, Rob, because you remember more about what I wrote than I do. That's very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm just the fog hat to your Chuck Berry. All of Chuck's children out here playing his licks.
Thank you very much. This has been Auriculum. This is Robert Christgau. I'd like to thank my producers, Joe Levy and Sandy Smollins.
Audiation.